once every 4 years, take a set of soil samples. Then you'll know how much fertilizer you can buy under the National Fertilizer Database. You don't need to be worried about that. You can then work out, well, if I'm wanting to take in slurry from a pig farmer or a poultry farmer or cattle slurry from a neighbour, I can do so and be comfortable that what I'm doing is not going to break any rules, and it's good for soil fertility as well, obviously, if you need lime or trying to build soil fertility to grow more grass, you know.
Hello, I'm Kieran Lynch and welcome to OviCast, the Teagasc Sheep podcast. Each episode will bring you latest insights, advice and technical updates for the sheep industry. In this episode, environmental specialist Tim Hyde joins us to discuss calculating nitrate stocking rates on farms. Tim explains how the figures are calculated for different classes of livestock. We discuss how to find the figures for cattle and how to calculate the contribution of sheep on a farm. And with new regulations coming into effect this year, Tim explains how this may impact producers for the coming season and the importance of knowing figures on your farm.
The stocking rate per farm has implications for farmers about certain rules they have to apply on their farm from a conditionality or a cross-compliance perspective we used to know at one time. The stocking rate could be 100 kgs per hectare of livestock nitrogen. It could be 130. There's rules for 150, 170. So depending on your grassland stocking rate in the previous year, there will be certain rules that will apply to every farmer that's listening this evening.
So in essence, it's the organic nitrogen produced by the livestock on the farm. And I suppose, Tim, that changes depending on the type of livestock. We might get into more detail after.
Yeah, so like if you're a sheep-only farmer, every lowland ewe produces 13 kgs of N per year. If it's a lowland hogget, it's 6 kgs of N per animal per year. Mountain ewes are 7, mountain hoggets are 4. So depending on the type of animals you have in your farm, that's from a sheep perspective. If you've suckler cows, it's 65 kgs of N per year, and there's different figures for 0 to 1 year old and 1 to 2 year old animals. So when the Department of Agriculture look at the average cattle numbers for the year, they allocate every animal type a certain amount of nitrogen that they excrete or produce during the year.
Tim, you also mentioned different rates or different bands basically that they fall in between, like over 100 kilos to over 130 kilos. Could you explain that a little bit more and what the implication that is, particularly maybe this year for those that will be over the 100 kilos?
Okay, so what we do as advisors is we look at an ag food, and a farmer can look at their own ag food. If they have bovines, they can see from that the amount of nitrogen produced by the livestock in the previous year under the nitrogen and phosphorus statements. And for the first time this year, they'll be able to see, well, in 2024, my bovine N per hectare is X over my whole farm. And then we talk about grassland stocking rate. Those 100, 130, 150 figures we mentioned are grassland stocking rates. So depending on which band you fall into, over 100 or over 130, there are certain rules applied to those farmers. What we normally do is we look to see is there any bovines on the farm, and then we add in the sheep numbers, and we come up with a stocking rate for the farm for the previous year, let's say, and we say, well, look, that's the rule. This is going to apply for you in 2025. We can go into it a little bit more detail, Kieran, if you want to we'll look at an example maybe.
We can, and I suppose it's just to be clear on the cattle one, in some instances, it's more clean cut. Obviously, you have to wait for all appropriate movements to go in, so it's a little bit backdated when you get it, but you can go into ag food and get that. But for the sheep one, Tim, you actually have to work it out.
100%, Kieran. The bovine one, because it's done through the cattle movement system, AIMS, it's a lot more up to date, and you'll be able to see the 24 figures for the year on ag food within about 2 weeks' time. The sheep one, as you said, is more complicated because there's no actual sheep movement system like AIMS for cattle. So what's taken on is you look at the 2 census dates. So you might look at the census date at the end of 23, the census date at the end of 24. It might say, well, look, I declared 100 ewes on that and 50 other sheep. And that's difficult to work out because that's a date in time at the end of December or in December of 23 and 24. Your numbers may have gone up and down. People who have buying store lambs or buying in hoggets maybe for your replacements or culling ewes during the year, those figures could fluctuate during the year. So you have to kind of break it down into a yearly average figure. And then by doing that, you can say, well, look, I declared 100 ewes in both censuses and I had 50 other sheep, but in reality, I only had 90 ewes on average and I had X amount of other sheep on average. So you kind of have to start initially with the census dates and then break it down on a yearly average after that.
I think maybe they'll further learn that for those that would be well under the limit of 100 kilos or well below where they would be at a very high stock rate of 170, it may not be as big an issue. But for those that are pushing closer to them boundaries, the option of working that out on a monthly basis, is that a runner?
It is, and I'd say, look, talk to your advisor on it if you need a bit of help on it. There are documents there on the department website that could help you, but I think initially talk to your advisor, get an idea, look at your ag food, number one, to see where your bovine figures are, and then try and add in your sheep numbers on average then for the year. And there are new rules this year that weren't there last year. So we talked about the 100 kg stocking rate, the 130 kg stocking rate. The 100 kg stocking rate is a new rule for this year. So we were looking at an example there, Kieran. Maybe someone who might have 20 store cattle, they might have 100 ewes, they might have 50 kind of other sheep hanging around. There might be, of those 50 other sheep, there might be 25 store lambs that are there for 5 months. They might have 25 replacements coming into the flock. When we kind of work all those figures out and applying 13 kgs to the ewes and 6 kgs to the hoggets and 2.4 kgs to the store lamb and taking an average of them for the year, you're in that example. If you had 20 hectares of land, you'd be hitting the 130 band. If you had 26 hectares of land, you'd be pushing for your stocking rate will reduce a little bit, but you're still over the 100. So, the new rule this year for the people that are over 100 kgs of N per hectare is you have to use all your slurry has to be spread by low emissions. And people would have seen that in the press, but the big question people have asked us is, what is my stocking rate? How do I work it out? And I think once you know, it's like driving in the dark without lights. You don't know where you're going. So you have to know where you're starting from. So if can get your stocking rate, your grassland stocking rate right, find out what that figure is, then you'll know what band, as you mentioned, you fall into and what rules you apply to you. So for people over 100, this year they have to spread all slurry by low emissions. There's also a new rule for them this year that they have to have 100% storage of animal manures for the winter period. And depending on whether that's livestock, bovines, that could be 16, 18, 20 or 22 weeks. Or if you have sheep, you need 6 weeks storage for your sheep manure or slurry, whatever it may be. And in a lot of situations, those people who will be just over 100 in that band of new rules for this year, they may have no animal housing. They may be outwintering ewes, they may be lambing outside, so that needs to be looked at with the advisor. What do I need to comply if I have an inspection?
And I think your analogy of driving in the dark with the headlights is appropriate, because there's probably a lot of people, those sailing closer to the very upper end, the 170 kilos of that, are aware of this for a number of years. They keep a tighter eye of what's coming, but it's conceivable, Tim, there's a lot of kind of mixed stocks farmers out there, sheep-only farmers out there that are in that 100 to 130 kilo range. Not that hard to get to, like HOs per hectare will get you there, that are probably unaware that these rules now apply to them.
100%, Kieran. And that's why, it's good to have this discussion. Raise the question. Find out from your advisor, what's my grassland stocking rate last year? Find out what rules apply to me going forward, and then make a plan as to, well, look, I am going to spread all my slurry with less, or, do I have to have soil samples? If you're higher stocked, you have to have soil samples on farm. And that has implications for, how much fertilizer I can buy. If I'm importing a bit of pig slurry or cattle slurry from another farmer, how much can I import, if any at all? If I'm over 130 of the band and I have no soil samples, I can't use any bag P chemical compound. I can't import any slurry. So there are different rules, and I don't want to complicate people with all the rules, because you need to find out where you are, and then your advisor will very clearly outline, well, this is what applies to you for this year. One thing I would just say, Kieran, I think I would encourage every farmer to take soil samples and take them sooner rather than later. Like, soil samples last for 4 years. So, once every 4 years, take a set of soil samples. Then you'll know how much fertilizer you can buy under the National Fertilizer Database. You don't need to be worried about that. You can then work out, well, if I'm wanting to take in slurry from pig farmer or a poultry farmer or cattle slurry from a neighbour, I can do so and be comfortable that what I'm doing is not going to break any rules, and it's good for soil fertility as well. Obviously, if you need lime or trying to build soil fertility to grow more grass,
No, I think that's a very good piece of advice. And again, the other one you touched on there, certainly this time of year, if in any doubt at all, contact your advisor and find out where you stand.
100%. I think, as I said to you, like driving in the dark, you have to know you put on the lights to know where you're going. And without the information to you and your advisor, we can't advise you what applies on your farm. But these new rules will affect an awful lot more farmers because it's new for 2025. And I think farmers are, there's been a lot of information meetings run by Teagasc advisors around the country. But definitely, we're coming up to the time of year, farmers might be starting to think about a bit slurry. You might be talking about maybe what fertilizer am I going to use for the year. So find out your stocking rate, take soil samples, get a fertilizer plan, and just get the advisor to run through with you. Well, what do I need to do this year to make sure if I have an inspection, I'll be fine.
Very useful update. Thanks very much for coming on, Ross.
No problem.
We'll leave it there for this week's episode. I'd like to thank Tim again for coming on. It's a useful piece of information, certainly a task that should be completed on farms at the moment, particularly before fertilizer and slurry season really kicks off. That's it for me. For updates from our sheep programme, keep an eye on our Twitter page at Teagasc Sheep. I'm Kieran Lynch. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us wherever you get your podcasts.